Poetry at its best does not shy away from the uncomfortable. In fact, it does the opposite. It embraces these mysterious aspects of existence. But in a world that often values what is likable and palatable for the masses, has poetry lost its strangeness and become ordinary? Or has it become too strange that it's lost its meaning? So let's dive into it and get a little bit weird. Which of the following statements do you find most strange? The sun rises in the sky and the room becomes warm. Or, I awake. The sun opens its bloody eye and slips its boiled light through the window down my throat. Both statements reference the morning sun. The first is direct, factual. It simply references what it references. The second, however, is alive, bloody, violent, and, for me at least, undeniably strange. When I use the word strange or strangeness, I mean something unfamiliar, surprising, hard to understand, and even a little bit uncomfortable. But as we will explore, I also mean something that gives a profoundly strange experience which can pave the way to awe, reverence, and wonder. At its core, poetry often disrupts our usual thought patterns and has the power to pull things apart, like preconceived ideas or concepts, and reassemble them. I'm exploring strangeness then from this angle, something profoundly inherent in the unfamiliar, rather than a random strangeness, weird for the sake of being weird. In the example I just mentioned, the sun's not just a celestial body, but a bleeding eye whose bloody light boils and slides down the speaker's throat. This metaphor alters our perception of the sun, which engages our imagination and allows us to dialogue with the thingness of what the sun is in our own consciousness from a unique standpoint. So personally, through poetry, but also through speech, I seek to find or create images that shatter my perception of things, where the obvious image or conclusion is resisted, revealing a truth I was not previously privy to. This kind of strangeness uses language to cast an image or sensory impression that is unique, which changes my relationship to myself and the world. And in this way, strangeness can be disruptive and transformational. So why am I telling you this? Much of daily language is predictable. But poetic strangeness, whether in imagery, syntax, thought, breaks that rhythm. And in doing so, it creates space for genuine attention. So let's explore some of what strangeness is in poetry, discussing thinkers such as Aristotle, Sigmund Freud, Owen Barfield, and Viktor Shklovsky. But first, what's the strangest thing you've ever written? Let us know in the comments. Let's dive further into the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, especially his work in Rhetoric, Book 3. The academic Christian Koch, in referencing Aristotle, argues that when it comes to rhetoric, one should make the language unfamiliar. Aristotle believed that poetry already possessed an inherent strangeness due to its metrical nature and elevated language, and stated that listeners would expect this when it came to poetry. For a speech, however, he said that the strangeness should be more subtle, hidden below the surface of conscious awareness to appear natural. He argued, quote, "If one composes well, there will be an unfamiliar quality, and that it will be clear and escape notice." Koch, through his reading of Aristotle, argues that strangeness in a speech can give a listener a feeling that there is an alluring further store of wisdom to acquire. A good poem will consistently give that feeling, that it opens up into the depth of the mysterious, touching on the questions at the heart of life itself, without necessarily providing concrete answers. This is a distinctive quality that allows us to return to the best poems again and again, because this further store of wisdom is endless. Koch further observes that for strangeness to be effective in rhetoric, the speaker must appear to speak straightforwardly and not artificially. If the hearer feels that the strangeness does not spontaneously spring from real wisdom, but rather reflects a deliberate effort to seem unfathomably wise, no profound effect will occur in the listener. I find this to be true also of poetry. The poet who relies merely on intuition or a nebulous sense of the mysterious often lacks the clarity required for a powerful poem. Koch contends that intentional strangeness, aiming to inspire awe, is one of the reasons we turn to poetry and literature in the first place. The key difference he highlights is that in poetry, strangeness is used openly, while in speeches it is concealed. Free verse poetry is also able to use strangeness, even though meter itself presents language as both familiar in its rhythm and strange in its specific word choice or context. This relates to poetry in way more ways than rhythm today. The unfamiliar quality, that sense of the unusual in language, and strange metaphors or symbols are some of the key elements that gives poetry its magic. Owen Barfield's exploration of strangeness has significantly affected much of my own work and thinking. Barfield states that almost all strangeness can produce an ascetic effect, but he argues that strangeness, to be used to maximum effect, must have interior significance and must come from a different plane or mode of consciousness and not merely as eccentricity of expression. He posits, therefore, that strangeness must be a strangeness of meaning, stating that if I invent the meaningless word hexterabonto and insert it in a line of verse, it can add nothing outside of sound value to the ascetic effect. Barfield also suggests that strangeness can also come from specialized language within your own language, from exotic disciplines. He says, no genuine lover of words can pick up a book on, say, botany or metallurgy and read of spores and capsules and lacanolate leaves of pearly and adamantine lustres without feeling poetically enriched by that section of the new vocabulary which actually impinges on his own present consciousness of nature. Barfield also notes that the unique language of various trades, sailors, golfers, actors, and more can be equally delightful to imbibe strangeness into a poem. Therefore, using these specialized words in poems, when they fit, can produce a strange ascetic effect if used intentionally and skillfully. So, for Barfield, strangeness has an ascetic value and is, in part, aligned with the proverbial truism that familiarity breeds content. He says that strangeness is different from wonder, as wonder, quote, is our reaction to things which we are conscious of, not quite understanding. And he goes on to say that strangeness, in fact, arouses wonder when we do not understand, ascetic imagination when we do. Owen Barfield distinguishes truly poetic strangeness from other merely ascetic types. He argues that pure poetry strangeness isn't just about different perspectives, but rather the very act of becoming conscious itself, a momentary grasp of the ever-transforming poetic by the rational mind. This kind of strangeness in meaning should be revelatory. It should lead us deeper into wisdom, or give us a new understanding of something far below the surface, more than a, that's weird. It should disrupt and make room for new and profound understandings. Let's move on to the Russian formalist idea of defamiliarization. Defamiliarization is a term coined by the Russian formalist Viktor Shklovsky in his essay Art as Device, which is sometimes translated as Art as Technique. It refers to presenting common things to an audience in an unfamiliar or unique way so they gain new perspectives and see the world in a new light. Shklovsky invented the term to, quote, distinguish poetic from practical language. And he argues that poetic speech is formed speech. Prose is ordinary speech, economical, easy, proper. The goodness of prose is a goddess of the accurate, facile type, of the direct expression of a child. The key to creating art, he argues, is to prevent over-atomization, which would lead an individual to function as though by formula. I see this as grooving into cliche. So in this sense, defamiliarization aims to disrupt and radically transform our perception of an object, a person, or a concept. It is a call to resist cliche, to ensure that an individual expresses themselves individually, writing only what they could write. And that means for you, writing only what you can write. Building on the idea of defamiliarization, there's a specific, often unsettling type of unexpected strangeness that Sigmund Freud explored, which he called the uncanny, which comes from the German Unheimlich. This occurs when the very familiar suddenly seems alien. It's a psychological effect where something repressed or forgotten returns, often in a disturbing way, where familiar scenes and backdrops in your house or anything becomes unfamiliar. Freud states directly that the uncanny is that class of the terrifying which leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar. This suggests a disruption of our sense of reality, where the line between what is real and what is imagined blurs, making the ordinary feel profoundly disturbing. Freud notes that, and I quote, "It is true that the writer creates a kind of uncertainty in us in the beginning by not letting us know, no doubt purposefully, whether he is taking us into the real world or into a purely fantastic one of his own creation." Freud also observes that in storytelling, and I quote again, "One of the most successful devices for easily creating uncanny effects is to leave the reader in uncertainty whether a particular figure in the story is a human being or an automation." And I will add, or an AI. Ultimately, Freud says that fiction presents more opportunities for creating uncanny sensations than are possible in real life, which I think also underscores poetry's unique capacity to evoke this powerful sense of unsettling strangeness through language. We can use all these words that we find familiar and make us feel like we're somewhere completely unfamiliar, disoriented, though in this conception of strangeness, finding meaning from that too. There seems to be quite a consensus among poets when it comes to estrangement. One of the issues is precisely what poetry and language can do to estrange and how to utilize it effectively. Peter Campion, taking a leaf from Aristotle, said, "If there are virtues specific to poetry, maybe the least discussed remains its ability to estrange. Shaped from language, the very medium in which we all consider ourselves experts, poems possess a distinct power to turn the familiar suddenly weird." If this is poetry's distinct power, how can we utilize it? What are its benefits? Let's turn to how we can use strangeness to create metaphors. Aristotle himself stated, "Metaphor especially has clarity and sweetness and strangeness." One of the reasons metaphor is strange is because it brings two things into consciousness and unity that were previously unfamiliar, causing them to be seen in a new light. The philosopher Charles Taylor might say that we are finding the hidden connections between things. A poet doesn't invent this connection, but finds them and makes use of them through image and language, something the phenomenologist Paul Ricoeur also argued. Louise Gluck pens the following from her poem The Pond. This is an extract which gives me a sense of illuminatory strangeness. Night covers the pond with its wing. Under the ringed moon, I can make out your face, swimming among minnows and the small echoing stars. In the night air, the surface of the pond is metal. Within, your eyes are open. These images put together for me become strange. The night with a wing covering the pond and a face around the echoing stars. I feel like I've learnt something new about the relationship between the night and a wing, and it makes me feel, as Taylor suggests, that the metal pond, the night, and the stars all have previously unseen connections, and these connections were revealed through Gluck's language. So to be effective, strangeness shouldn't be muddy. A poet needs to create clear images that can penetrate the imagination, but the clear image can itself be strange, a unique synthesis of disparate things. Here's an example from T.S. Eliot's poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes. Here the fog is given the strange animalistic qualities of a cat, an unexpected but vividly clear image that makes the familiar urban atmosphere strange. When you read the same word over and over, its repeated familiarization can become strange. It loses its meaning, much like eating the same food every day loses its flavor. It ceases to be salient, as if it has dumped its own contents and is crawling around as flesh with no bone. If a word loses its meaning or a phrase loses its metaphorical curiosity, it becomes a dead metaphor, losing its bones, becoming a nebulous heap of skin with nothing to wrap around. But poets like you can practice a kind of poetic necromancy, breathing new life into these dormant linguistic constructs. We can take a familiar, worn-out phrase and examine it more closely, extending its original meaning in unexpected ways. This process of reimagining cliches makes the familiar strange again, often leading to profoundly weird poetry that changes our relationship to these once dormant phrases, bringing them back to life. Poetic necromancy. For example, consider the proverb, "A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush." We might revitalize it. Knowing a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, I fire an arrow into the green leaves, which quiver like a lip on the edge of a secret, before red seeps down a stem. I open the body of this plant, pluck this breathless being from the soil, and place it next to the live bird in my hand, whose small breath casts a terrible shadow. By pushing the literal implications of the phrase, we make it strange, unsettling, and ultimately profoundly new. Can you think of a common idiom or cliche that you'd love to revitalize or make strange again? Put your own poetic necromancy in the comments. Beyond extending dead metaphors, revitalizing language and preventing it from becoming predictable or purely informational demands a poet's conscious engagement with its inherent poetic qualities: rhythm, unusual syntax, vivid images, potent symbols, and more. If we give ourselves away to the flattened, utilitarian language of television or purely informational texts, we lose this sense of profound strangeness that poetry can offer. Can we become more attuned to strangeness? W.B. Yeats once said, "The world is full of magic things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper." He also said, "There's another world, but it is in this one, and what can be explained is not poetry. Is the strange then that which cannot be explained? Is poetry language made strange, but strange to produce the ascetic effect of awe, wonder, and even transcendence? This leads us to the concept of duende as articulated by the poet Federico García Lorca. Duende is not merely inspiration or technique, but a mysterious, dark force that he says rises in the blood from the soles of the feet. Duende is a kind of dark strangeness, a numinousness that speaks to a primal, often uncomfortable truth of our being. Lorca described it as a power, not a working, a struggle, not a thought. It's the moment of profound, darkly illuminative authenticity that gives certain art its indelible, strange power. Lorca emphasizes that the duende burns in the blood like powdered glass, and is a force distinct from the two figures of inspiration, the muse and the angel. I would argue it's the mysterious quality akin to the Jungian shadow that we can open the gate to so it can flow into us and out into our poems. You can consciously invite the duende in, though its full emergence can also be unbidden, much like a nightmare. For example, you can purposely focus on horror before sleep to induce a nightmare, or they can just happen to you. While not exactly the same, this analogy highlights how duende can be both sought and spontaneously manifest. Practical approaches for a poet to open the gate to this duende-like strangeness might include immersing yourself in dark ambient music, engaging with darker poetry, exploring rituals or meditation with the lights off to invite a deeper sense of the numinous dark. Either way, while Barfield's strangeness of meaning often points toward new understanding or wisdom, Lorca's duende leans into the darker, more visceral and explicable facets of human experience, exploring the undercurrents of dread and fatality and more. However, both point to something under the surface. It's just that their emphasis differs. In what way can poetry bring the mind to altered states of consciousness? Poetry can induce experiences similar to mystical, occult, and religious experiences, which often involve a sense of altered consciousness, a feeling of being outside our normal, rational state of mind. Strangeness in poetry can contribute to this by disorienting us, challenging our expectations, and creating a space for wonder and awe. One way poetry achieves this is through sound and rhythm, like incantation or repetition, especially as repetition can gain power and resonance, and various sounds and patterns, like with music, can create a hypnotic effect. Poetry can also open us up to the sublime, which includes feelings of awe and terror and boundlessness, which are all interlinked with that ascetic effect of strangeness. When we comprehend something vast, something that lies beyond our ability to grasp, the world of paradox, the incomprehensible massiveness of a god or life or the universe, we can spend time in that archetypal, defamiliarized state where new meanings can occur. Beyond familiar language and imagery, other poetic devices can evoke profound strangeness. The volta or turn in a sonnet can be strange for its abrupt shift in perspective or argument. A haiku can become strange in its aha moment when multiple meanings deepen the experience. Paradoxical language, which holds contradictory truths in tension, naturally creates cognitive strangeness as our brain wants to reconcile certain differences and bring them into resolution, though there might not be one. As well, a sudden change in voice or speaker within a poem can disorient and defamiliarize our readers' experiences. We have poets like Ted Hughes with his mythic and primal unconventionality in his Crow poems, and HD through her exploration of the occult and psychological depths, who effectively utilize these elements. And plus, poetry in itself can be said to be an art of defamiliarization, which allows for transformation and change to occur. The more we see things from a new point of view and integrate them, the deeper our experience of life can get. Art upsets and changes. Here are 12 key considerations to help you differentiate between effective strangeness and ineffective obscurity. Let's start with effective strangeness. Purposeful disruption. Effective strangeness serves a purpose. It's not random or arbitrary, but carefully crafted to evoke a specific mood, feeling, or idea. Internal logic. Even when strange, the writer often has an internal logic. It might not follow the rules of everyday reality, but it creates its own set of rules and operates within them. Evocative imagery. Strange poetry often relies on vivid and evocative imagery that, while unusual, is powerful and resonant. It will make us feel something. Sound and rhythm. Skilled poets use sound devices like alliteration, assonance, and more, and rhythm to create a sense of strangeness that can be beautiful and compelling. Depth of meaning. Even if initially obscure, effective strange poetry often reveals deeper layers of meaning upon careful reading, reflection, and rereading. Emotional or intellectual impact. Ultimately, effective strangeness moves the reader. It might provoke, disturb, or mystify, but it will always leave a lasting impression. Now let's talk about ineffective strangeness. Randomness. Ineffective strangeness feels random, chaotic, or nonsensical. It will feel as if there's no apparent reason for the strangeness, probably because there isn't. Lack of coherence. The writing lacks coherence even on its own terms. The ideas are disjointed and there's no clear thread connecting them, or there's images that are too random. Vague imagery. The imagery is vague, abstract, or cliched, failing to create a vivid or memorable impression in the reader's mind. Jarring language. The language is jarring or awkward, not because of a deliberate stylistic choice, but because of poor craftsmanship. Meaninglessness. The writing ultimately lacks meaning. It doesn't offer any new insights or perspectives, and it doesn't evoke any significant emotional or intellectual response. Pretentiousness. Ineffective strangeness can often feel pretentious, as if the writer is trying to appear profound without actually having anything profound to say. Strangeness in poetry can be a powerful, ascetic stool that creates the conditions for mystical, occult, or even religious experiences. By disrupting our ordinary perceptions, evoking altered states of consciousness, and catalyzing a sense of transcendence, poetry can open us up to the possibility of experiencing something beyond the everyday world. And these can all be heightened by strangeness. Ultimately, the power of strangeness in poetry lies in its capacity to break through our habitual ways of seeing and thinking. It's not about being bizarre for its own sake, but about re-enchanting the world, inviting us into deeper engagement with reality and offering new avenues for profound understanding and self-discovery. Louise Gluck's poem, All Hallows Eve, ends with a wonderfully strange image, and the soul creeps out of the tree. Here, the soul, typically understood as immaterial, is given a physical form and the ability to creep, which, for me at least, takes on a strange, almost bodily presence. This kind of peculiar embodiment makes the familiar concept of the soul uncanny, deepening its mystery and making it resonate with this unique power. This is the essence of effective strangeness. It doesn't just make me feel like it's a bit weird, it transforms my understanding and leaves a lasting imprint. I will never think of a soul the same way again. As Srikanth Reddy aptly puts it, but maybe the strangest thing about poetry to me is how it makes other things strange. Poetry makes something as ordinary as a stone feel stony to us all over again. astonishingly by finding new language for things. And Gluck herself said, poetry survives because it haunts, and it haunts because it is simultaneously utterly clear and deeply mysterious, because it cannot be entirely accounted for, it cannot be exhausted. To continue your journey of deepening your understanding and becoming a better poet, like, subscribe, and comment with your strangest possible comment on this video. You can also join the Poetry Vessel mailing list, which is in the description box below. Also, click on that video that's coming up on your screen. You know you want to.